Part 1 ended on a question. If the parties cannot move themselves, who can? Who has both the interest to want this resolved and the weight to press it? One power, with its allies behind it, the United States. Now, saying this is easy. Laying out exactly why takes some work. It begins with a much more basic question. Why is the United States involved in the region at all? The answer is the logic that has anchored American strategy in the Middle East since the end of the Second World War. No single hostile power can be allowed to dominate it. And the reason why comes down to one thing: oil. Now you may be thinking the United States is energy independent. We are the largest oil producer in the world, sitting on top of tens of billions of barrels of shale. After all, only a small percentage of our overall oil consumption originates in the region. So why should Gulf oil matter to us at all? Because securing supply is one thing. The price you pay for it is another. Oil is priced in a global market. A shock to supply anywhere moves the price everywhere, and every economy on Earth pays it, ours included. And what sits in the Gulf? About half the world's proven reserves, and about a fifth of the world's daily supply. We should also be precise about what dominating the Gulf would mean, because it does not necessarily mean conquest. No army needs to march into Riyadh. It means hegemony. One regional power so strong that the producers have to bend to it, and strong enough that it cannot be easily deterred. A would-be hegemon does not need to own a single well. It needs the countries that do own them to be afraid of it, afraid enough to pump or to cut on its terms. The wells are also vulnerable. The tankers pass through one narrow strait. Achieve that dominance, and you could move the global price without firing a shot. And despite recent events, disruption is not command. A spoiler can cause a disturbance for a time, potentially at a cost to itself. A hegemon dictates the terms. Denying this power to a rival is our core regional objective. And it does not go away because we got good at fracking. None of this is a theory. The United States has been enforcing it since the end of the Second World War. During the Cold War, the baseline job was keeping the Soviets out. But in 1979, the entire American position got upended. The Iranian Revolution turned one of America's strongest partners in the region into its most committed enemy, and the Soviets marched into Afghanistan. Washington's answer came within months: the Carter Doctrine. Any power that tried to take control of the Gulf would be treated as an attack on the vital interests of the United States, and it would be repelled by force. In 1990, when Saddam took Kuwait and appeared as if he would make a move towards the Saudi fields, America went to war to throw him back. And notice what that war was. It drove him out of Kuwait, mitigated the threat, and stopped. The interest was in denying the region to a would-be hegemon, not remaking it. One word there matters: remaking. Because years later, America did try to remake a country in this region. It invaded Iraq, removed its government, and stayed to build a new one. It is a war that has left a long, bitter shadow over American politics. But the mistake was not that force was used to advance a perceived American interest. It was the underlying goal: trying to remake a nation from the outside primarily through military power. What I am describing is the opposite: a narrow aim. Deny a hostile power, regional hegemony, and the oil lever. That is the whole of it. Now the Soviets are gone. Saddam is gone. But the Iranian revolutionary government is still there, still pushing towards hegemony more than 4 decades on, mainly through its proxies, its missiles, and through its nuclear program. In 2026, the United States fought a war with Iran. Its aftermath remains unresolved. I do not want to delve into advocacy or opposition to the war itself. That is for a different audio essay. What I think is totally clear is that for as long as this regime endures, it will remain hostile to the United States and set on attaining regional dominance. This is not in our interests or that of our regional and global allies. Now, there is a narrative that has been building for some time across the political spectrum. America should pull back from this region. We have done more harm than good, and it is time to disengage. There is something to it. But you can question the recent war with Iran on its own terms, how it was waged, or whether it should have been fought at all. I'm not arguing that either way, and it is beside the point. That debate lives at the operational and tactical level. My argument is at the strategic level. And there, one thing holds regardless of how that debate settles. A hostile power cannot be allowed to dominate the Gulf. Leaving does not make that danger disappear. It only decides whose hand is on the lever. And a hostile power holding it would not stop at the price of oil. It would set the terms of the entire region, with the United States shut out. That is what disengaging hands over. So the lever cannot be surrendered. It has to be denied. The only question is how to deny it, without carrying the whole weight alone. This brings us to Israel, and to the reframe this whole part turns on. The United States, acting as a balancer against a hostile would-be hegemon in the region, can hold this line by itself, and for most of a century it largely has. Fleets, bases, its own forces. But holding it alone is heavy. It costs money, political capital, and most importantly, American lives. What lightens the load is a partner on the ground. A capable regional partner or partners aligned with us that can help deter Iranian power and push back against it, so America does not have to do all of it alone. Let's look at the candidates. The Arab states can't. While they have economic heft due to their natural resources, their militaries are palace guards, built to protect their regimes from their own people, not to project power outward. The Turks won't. They can project power in Syria, in Libya, in the Caucasus. But Turkey is a NATO member that hedges with Russia and Iran, with an agenda that runs against ours as often as with it. That leaves Israel, capable and willing. And again, leaving judgments of the 2026 war aside, their performance in this fight was proof of their value. And that value is the whole point. The U.S.-Israel relationship was never and is not primarily about sentiment. President Kennedy broke the old arms posture in 1962, selling Israel Hawk missiles as a counterweight to a Soviet-backed Egypt and Syria. It became a deep strategic alliance only after 1967, when Israel's victory proved its worth on the battlefield. The side benefits are tangible as well, and they reinforce the point rather than soften it. One is technology, missile defense that we build together, and that benefits both countries. Active protection systems, like Trophy, developed by Israel, are now integrated onto American tanks. Cyber capabilities that rival our own. Weapons tested in real combat. Another is intelligence, deep, high-value sharing. This one ties straight to our core interest, because Israel is our eyes on Iran and its proxies, which is the very threat our main regional concerns center on. And there is one more, and it is not about security at all. It is economic. Nearly every major American technology company runs a research arm in Israel. Intel, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, Nvidia. Intel has been there since the 1970s and accounts for close to a tenth of Israel's exports. Apple built its first research center outside the United States there. This is not aid, and it is not charity. It is American industry woven into the Israeli economy because it pays to do so. More proof that tie is interest-based, not sentimental. So here is the shift. Everything left in this part rests on it. Israel is a means. It is not an end. The United States is not in the region for Israel. It uses its relationship with Israel to serve a core strategic interest that is entirely its own. And this runs straight into the one myth I have to clear before we go further. There is a persistent story that it runs the other way, that Israel controls American policy, that the tail wags the dog. It is common enough that if I do not discuss it, it quietly undoes everything I just said. So let me address it with a distinction that matters. At the strategic level, the story is plainly false. The United States would be in this region with or without Israel. Israel does not set America's strategic interests. They are America's own. However, at the operational and tactical level, something real is going on, and no one should pretend otherwise. Pro-Israel influence on specific American decisions is undeniable, and it is stronger than the ordinary pull of a close ally. It works through a very strong base of American domestic support. Americans who organize to advocate for Israel. The electoral weight of the support. The sheer depth of the relationship. And it can impact major decisions, the way other allies cannot. This myth, however, takes that real influence and turns it into something more. It says that influence doesn't merely shape outcomes. It ultimately decides them. In reality, though, influence is all it is. It is powerful, and sometimes it presses hard. But when it collides with a real American interest, that interest wins, and the influence gives way. The record is plain. Israeli leaders have wanted to act themselves, wanted Washington to act, or to hold back, many times across the decades, and have been overruled or ignored. President Reagan sold AWACS to Saudi Arabia over furious Israeli objections. George H.W. Bush put intense pressure on Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir to not retaliate militarily against Iraqi Scud missiles fired into Israel during the 1991 Gulf War. President Obama signed the 2015 Iran nuclear deal over Netanyahu's open objection. A sitting Israeli prime minister went to the floor of Congress to argue against it, in person, and the United States did it anyway. And very recently, one of the clearest cases yet. The United States struck an initial deal to end its war with Iran. Israel was not a party to it, despite actively participating in the conflict. Israel openly criticized it, and made clear it considers itself not bound by parts of it. That choice was America's, not Israel's. These are but some examples. Influence presses and can be impactful, but the United States decides for itself. That is the line between influence and control. Now, the current administration has at times aligned itself with the Netanyahu government more closely than its predecessors. But that alignment is Washington's choice. It is not Israel's command. Going along is still choosing. So our regional strategic interests are real. Israel is an instrument of it, and while they do have influence in policymaking, their sway does not override American interests. With that all being said, let's bring this back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how this conflict actually affects core American interests. It works on them in two ways. It forecloses a significant opportunity to strengthen America's position in the region, and it imposes a running tax on everything else. One important point first, so I am not overselling it. The conflict is not some master key to the region. The Abraham Accords prove that, normalizing some Arab states with Israel without any Palestinian deal at all. But it blocks the single biggest remaining prize, and it taxes the rest. Let's start with the prize. The prize is a consolidated economic and security order in the region, one that favors the United States, anchored by a normalized Israel and Saudi Arabia. A formal alliance that the quiet, deniable coordination between them can never become while the conflict stands. An order stable enough that America can commit fewer forces and less attention to the region, so it can turn to its other priorities in the world. And this is not just in America's interest. For the Saudis, the logic is just as strong. It rests on a real hatred, and the hatred is old. Saudi Arabia and Iran are rivals for primacy in the Gulf and for the leadership of the Muslim world. Sunni against Shia, Arab against Persian. They have fought each other through proxies for decades, from Yemen to Lebanon. For Riyadh, the threat is not abstract. Iranian proxies ring the kingdom. Iranian missiles and drones can reach it. In 2009, a strike widely attributed to Iran knocked out half of Saudi oil production in a single morning. And an Iranian nuclear bomb is the Saudi nightmare. Even the 2023 restoration of relations between them, the one China brokered, was a hedge against an Iran they could not deter. It was not a reconciliation. And when war came in 2026, Iran sent drones and missiles against Saudi oil facilities and other targets. 3 years after this diplomatic handshake. And again, while the aftermath of the war is unsettled, none of it changes what Iran just showed them. It will strike them directly when it chooses. That durable hostility is why a Saudi opening to Israel is solid, and not a fragile bet. During the war, Arab states indirectly coordinated with Israel against the incoming missiles, Saudi Arabia included, quietly, deniably. But they did it. And while some may ask whether the war changed the Saudi calculus for normalization, it did not. If anything, it strengthened it. It proved Israel's offensive power against Iran, and it showed Riyadh how vulnerable it actually is, and how limited its options are. Now you can measure how badly Washington wants this. Pre-war, Washington was offering Saudi Arabia a binding defense treaty and civil nuclear cooperation to get normalization done. That is not the price of ribbon cutting. That is the price you pay for something you consider strategically enormous. So what does formalizing actually buy the United States that the current quiet version doesn't? A fully integrated air defense architecture against Iranian missiles and drones. Open basing and overflight. A standing regional defense bloc. The India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. The counter to China's Belt and Road. It locks Saudi Arabia into the American order and forecloses a Chinese economic inroad. The Saudi king and the Israeli prime minister on the same stage, coordinating on Iran and other regional issues in the open, where their own people and Tehran can see there is no walking it back. And most importantly, it lets the United States consolidate Gulf security around an Israel-anchored coalition and shift from primary defender to over-the-horizon backstop. Still in reserve for a major war, no longer the front line of regional deterrence. Lighter, but not gone. Freed to put its weight on the larger contest in the Indo-Pacific. The most ambitious version of this, Israeli aircraft on Saudi soil, a formal Middle East NATO, is the least certain piece. Riyadh may take recognition, economic ties, and its American treaty and stop short of that. But even the least best outcome is a huge win. Saudi Arabia anchored to the American order, China out, Iran isolated. Nowhere on that scale is it just symbolic. And not one piece of it can happen while the conflict in the Levant remains unresolved, with no end in sight. Even a strongman like MBS cannot absorb the domestic cost of formalizing ties with Israel while the Palestinian issue is live and bleeding. It is tied to his own religious legitimacy as custodian of the two holy mosques and to his claim to lead the Sunni Muslim world. And post-Gaza, opinion across the Arab world has only hardened. As of the middle of 2026, that is exactly where it sits. The United States still pushing, and the Saudis still conditioning everything on a credible path to a Palestinian state. Post-Gaza, that is no longer a negotiating posture. It is a wall. And the current Israeli leadership cannot, will not climb it. So the conflict keeps the United States carrying the heavy direct burden in the region, tied down with no real path to draw down towards the Pacific. That is the ultimate prize to American interests the conflict blocks. Now the tax it charges. I will call it the legitimacy tax, and it has to stay inside the rule from Part 1. This is a perception cost, not a moral verdict. The conflict generates a narrative of Israeli oppression, and that narrative, fair or not, is what the United States pays for. And rivals weaponize it. Iran, Russia, and China brand the United States a hypocrite and rally the Global South and the Middle East off the oppression story. The portrait is of an America that enforces the rules on Russia and everyone else while shielding Israel. And that portrait eats an American credibility, exactly where it competes with China. The United States can make its case for backing Israel all it wants. It can lay out every reason and defend every move. Across the Middle East and the Global South, the view of this conflict is set against us. None of it lands. And while the conflict runs, that view does not bend. The images are live. They carry the story, and no argument competes with them. So the tax is not something advocacy can lower. The only thing that lifts it is resolving the conflict. Take away the live conflict, and rivals can still reach for the history. But the fuel is gone, and it stops rallying anyone the way it did. One point, because it is important to note. This tax is soft and diffuse. It raises the price of American leadership. It does not collapse it. And it is sharpest right now post-Gaza. That is the cost abroad. There is also a cost at home, and it is the one growing fastest. The domestic cost is the rising opposition inside the United States to American support for Israel. The engine here isn't just the conflict. It is shifting demographics, political ideologies, and alignments, amplified by a media environment built to reward outrage. This conflict is high emotion, vivid, identity-coded. Exactly the content that environment amplifies most. So the most charged voices on each side travel furthest, and a whole generation that follows the conflict through algorithmic feeds gets it at its most polarizing. The ecosystem does not create the positions. It hardens them and widens the divide. The main source of the opposition is on the left. It is grounded in an ideological reading of the conflict that sees the Palestinians as the wrong party. And it is hardened over the last few years. The numbers tell the story. About 65% of Democrats now side with the Palestinians, a record low for Israel. Now there is a smaller secondary current on the right. Although about 70% of Republicans side with Israel, solid support has narrowed to Republicans over 50, an aging base. The opposition is primarily driven from an America First view. The country's money and attention belong at home, not poured into the region. The aid is a lightning rod here, about $3.8 billion a year under the 2016 agreement, which is tiny against the overall federal budget. So that objection is really about priorities and emotions, not the line item. When you put this all together, you get the trend that matters. For the first time in over 2 decades, Israelis no longer lead in American sympathy overall. 36 to 41, down from 54 to 31 just 3 years earlier. Among Americans 18 to 34, sympathy runs 53 to 23 for the Palestinians. A commitment that was bipartisan for 2 full generations is becoming a partisan liability. And because the gap is generational, the trend runs one way. And that is what turns a cost into a problem you cannot manage your way out of. The support does not vanish. The strategic logic holds, and Israel stays too valuable to drop. What erodes is the ability to sustain it cheaply. The consensus used to be that support for Israel was assumed. Now, every year the demographic curve runs, the same policy costs more and more political capital, drawn from a narrowing base. So doing nothing is not holding a steady price. It is watching the price climb while the means to pay it shrink. So the conflict taxes American interests abroad, and it taxes American politics at home. Which leaves the question, what does the United States actually do about it? We've already named the move: resolution. Because there are really only 4 things the United States can do, and 3 of them fail. The first is to manage it. Keep doing what we have done. Contain the conflict crisis to crisis, the default of the last 2 decades. But managing is just deferral with a respectable name. The prize stays locked. The tax keeps accruing. Nothing improves. You pay more each year to manage a problem that keeps getting worse. The second is to move away from Israel. Gradually distance, condition the aid, reduce the exposure as the tax and the eroding support start to bite. And I mean the realistic version, not the slam-the-door fantasy of cutting Israel loose. But even so, it is the worst of the 4. It weakens the American strategic position. It frays one of our most important regional partnerships, and it erodes the whole anti-hegemon posture, ceding ground to Iran. It does not even move Israel. Israel has options, and it is one of the strongest powers in the region, so it hedges and survives rather than yields. The conflict continues. The tax persists, maybe with less vehemence, but it still persists. You pay the strategic cost and buy nothing with it. And you lose the leverage to constrain what Israel does. Because the moment you distance yourself from the relationship, you forfeit your hold over it. The third is to bypass the conflict. Normalize Israel with the Arab world over the Palestinians' heads. The Abraham Accords path, which is the actual current strategy. Focus the region entirely on containing Iran, and treat the Palestinian issue as a distraction. This is a serious strategy in Washington, but it has a hard ceiling. The Saudis will not sign while the conflict stays deadlocked. So you get the lesser accords, the states already willing, and never the capstone, the Saudi prize. And the tax keeps accruing the whole time. Which leaves the 4th. Resolve it. How we do this is the subject of the parts that follow. But one more thing about resolution belongs here, because it answers the cost at home as well as the cost abroad. Of the 4 options, resolve is the only one that also lifts the domestic cost. And it lifts it for a simple reason. The domestic cost is the conflicts. End the conflict, and the left's objection loses most of its force, because it is largely grounded in the conflict and the occupation, and a settlement ends both. The grievance that gave the opposition a mass following falls away. What is left is the maximalist edge that will accept nothing short of one state. Isolated, arguing against a settlement most of the left actually wanted. Also, the region cools. The United States can step back, and the right's resentment eases on its own. This is a push even a war-weary public can get behind, because the fatigue out there is with money and lives and direct involvement in the region's wars. This is a peacemaking effort, paid for largely in the region, aimed at a lighter American footprint over time. Moving away from Israel looks like the exit, and isn't. Resolving the conflict is the one that actually delivers it. It has been attempted many times and never achieved. I know that. But the best move is still to try.